So that was a great first session, and hopefully ours goes just as well. I'm Shimal Shah. I'm a transplant surgeon, HPB surgeon at University of Cincinnati. I don't think he needs any introduction, but this is Will Chapman, and he's the chief of transplant surgery at Washington University. And I will admit he's been an icon for me in my career and has helped me tremendously. And I think it's really important for the young people in the room to have a mentor outside of your institution, and that's essentially what Will has been for me, someone that really has no vested interest in what happens to you locally or anything like that and can give you sound advice. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes getting to know him, and if you have other questions, please, you can come up to the mic if you want. But so Will, what made you go into surgery?
My father was an anesthesiologist, and so as a kid, I had the opportunity, go with your parents' day for what they do. My mother was a school teacher. I accompanied both as a young kid, and when I went with my father to the operating room, what was going on was pretty interesting to me, but I was way more interested in what was going on the other side of the curtain than I was in anesthesia. I think I was naively thought that anesthesia was boring, not much going on, wasn't much of a challenge, but that drew me towards at least medicine and thinking of surgery. Now, well, one thing that changed is I really was headed towards being a veterinarian in late high school, and at that time, kind of late in thinking about that, actually my mother said to me, well, you're going to go to essentially equivalent background training that you would to go into medicine. You're going to take care of some important things in the animal world, but you're going to be very limited in what you're ultimately able to do. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly at that time, you had a sick dog, the dog had cancer, they were put to sleep, whether or not you might be able to do something for them. So, at that point, that's kind of when I shifted back to medicine and ultimately to surgery.
So if you weren't going to be a surgeon, you would have been a vet?
I would be a veterinarian.
Oh. Tell me about residency. What's one of the most important things that you remember or something that sticks out from residency?
I don't think of myself as being old, but I'm pretty old now. And the era of residency was pretty different. And, some of it certainly more challenging. There was a lot more service work. It was, for me, mostly, and really for everybody at that time, it was mostly every other night call. And so we used to have to turn in the hours of the week for the ACGME required that once a year back in the 80s, just like they do today. And so it was often between 100 and 120 hours a week. So, you were there. That's kind of all you could do. It wasn't optimal for thinking about career training. But one thing that was a big plus is people were very collegial. The bonds you made, the people you helped out, was really collegial. So, when you say, what do you remember? I remember it was 150% all the time, not much else. That was your 5 clinical years. But the people you met, the colleagues that you became friends with were really close.
Will grew up in North Carolina, and he went to medical school at MUSC. The residency he's talking about is Vanderbilt, and then he did some additional training after that. So Vanderbilt is where he was taking every other night call. And who influenced you to go into HPB or transplant, and how did that transpire?
So my research time at Vanderbilt was focused on biliary tract and liver disorders. And that was a little bit, it was something I was interested in, but didn't know that much about when I started. As I spent time, I became more and more interested in, HPV as a specialty was, there were really no HPV fellowships at that time in the U.S. to speak of. But that's when I began to have an interest. At the time, I was going to go, I had lined up to go spend a fellowship with Les Blumgart, who was in Switzerland at the time. And because there really weren't dedicated HPV fellowships that were very well formed in the U.S. I didn't think I was going into transplant. I had very little, that wasn't on the radar. As things worked out, in May of the time I was going to go in July to Switzerland, we had a place to live, I had a car, I had taken German in Bern. You had to speak German to get by. But at that point, Professor Blumgart had made the decision he's coming to the U.S. So it was really at the 11th hour. So
Wow.
instead, I went and spent a year in London at King's College. King's is the busiest transplant center in Europe. Was in, still is now, for liver transplant. While I was there, I became friends with Surgeon Jerry McAtee, who was there from Ireland, starting a liver transplant program. Jerry was of the view and convinced me, look, while you're here, you ought to get some exposure. There was no transplant program at Vanderbilt, so I had no exposure to liver transplant. So I spent time with the transplant team and got some training in transplant. When I came back to Vanderbilt, I was practicing HPV the first couple of years. One of the transplant surgeons left. Wright Pinson asked me if I would join the transplant team, which I did, and really got, I would say, kind of on-the-job training. My training time in London was limited, but that's really what changed the course of what I did after that. So it's a really meandering way to get to the end point. Having said that, I think that's what happens to a lot of people in their careers.
It's not as scripted as you might think, considering how successful you've been. So,
What's that?
not as scripted as you might think, considering how
No, it's
successful
not
you've been. Many of us, I tell people this all the time, that when you're operating, you hear someone's voice, in your head, do this, do that. For me, it's some of the people that I did fellowship with. And how about you? When you operate, you hear anyone's voices?
The chief at Vanderbilt was a guy named John Sawyers, and he didn't speak a lot, but he was very direct and precise when he would speak, and don't cut corners, do the procedure right, go fast in the fast parts, go slow in the slow parts. That's a voice that I will hear.
Best surgeon you've ever seen?
That's a tough question because there's so many good surgeons that I've been able to see operate. A couple I've mentioned, Les Blumgart, Professor Blumgart, he was a master in the operating room. And certainly a good surgeon, but he could direct many things at once. So, at the I don't know when he developed this at New York, but he had a camera operator that was present at every case, at least later in his career. And so even when he wasn't scrubbed, he could direct the case maybe as well, not scrubbed,
Yeah.
is scrubbed. And all the while, he was directing other activities with patients, with other things going on. David Nagorny is an excellent surgeon, and he's one of the few people I know who I mean, there's some people from there, they could tell me better, but I think almost always he's got 2 rooms. He's probably one of the busiest surgeons in the U.S. And but that attention to what's going on in the case at hand is really top tier.
What's your favorite part of the day?
I think it's probably the morning.
When you wake up?
Well, when the workday is beginning. Got cases lined up, you got to figure out what your schedule is, you got to get things underway. There's a little bit of pressure to make sure you pull it all off, you know, it gives you direction of what's going to happen.
What's the favorite activity that you do outside of the hospital? Something that you do for yourself. Not for your kids, not for your wife, just for Will Chapman.
Well, I would say it probably is being out on our duck hunting farm.
Duck hunting?
We have 3 hunting dogs, and we've got a place we go that's about 25 miles from our house. So, you know, if I'm free, got an afternoon, if I can go, I'm out with the dogs training or duck hunting.
Wow, okay. What do you do to decompress?
Take my dogs to the farm. I mean, that's sounds kind of boring, but it's really a lot of fun, and they have a good time, and I have a good time.
That's great. Do a case or write a paper?
Well, they're both important, but I would say do a case. I mean, you know, the focus of heading on to a clinical challenge, to get in the operating room, I think the feedback is great, and that would probably be the thing that I would lean towards more than I'm going to give the case away or dodge a case and stay and write a paper.
Okay. So it's your elective day. You can do one case. It can be a transplant, it can be HPB, it can be anything. What case is it?
I don't know. I think the unique thing about liver surgery is it's a little bit different than pancreas surgery. You know, we heard that just earlier. It's dual Whipple. I think liver transplant or major liver resection, they're pretty high on the list to me. They both are. I think maybe the one I would say is liver resection with vascular reconstruction. That's kind of got some unique challenges. You've got to have the right, you've got to plan it in a way that can be different for each case. Every time you have that come up, you don't know often that you need to do a portal vein reconstruction, for example, or cable replacement. So there's some last minute changes in the plan. But that's probably what I would say would be the.
So you like if you had to pick one case, you like the stressful case, the one that you're thinking about that night, even the next morning, getting an ultrasound, making sure everything's open. That's what you want to do for one case, not just a straightforward right lobe, 3 centimeter tumor.
Those are pretty enjoyable too, and certainly less stressful. But I think that challenge of the adding in the vascular reconstruction is rewarding. Let's say that.
One of the things that Will is great at least in the transplant community, is that he has crossed over into academic surgery, general surgery. He's on the board. And when I visited WashU to give grand rounds, we walked around, had a couple conferences, and then we walked into a room and he said, "Let me show you where I do my best work." And we walked into the surgeon's lounge. And he was like the mayor in the surgeon's lounge. So as a background behind that, are you better in the OR or out of the OR?
I think probably in the OR, but I do think and you know this from your work at Cincinnati, the thing that we all have that's really rewarding is our team. And it's that team composition, it's that team building, it's who the other people are in the room with you that really make your job rewarding, that really make your job smooth. And it doesn't, it takes time. It doesn't, I think it takes 10 years to accumulate a group that you're collegial with. Some people leave, you recruit new team members, everyone has to get used to each other. But that's the part of the out of the OR that I think is nice. That's the part that's rewarding. That's the part that takes a little work. It's pretty subtle. It's a little bit every day, but that's what you accomplish in the long term.
Your wife probably knows you the best at home. Who knows you the best in the surgery world? Who's your bud at this meeting or around the surgical community?
Well, I would say in the first of all, we're really blessed with a great group at WashU. So, you guys know them. A lot of really good people. Steve Strasberg, Bill Hawkins, Ryan Fields, Dominic Sanford just joining the group. Adil Khan is here. But probably the person that I would say would know the best of what I'm thinking or what the problems might be or when I get in trouble, that's Magella Doyle. And she's a technically excellent surgeon. So from the you need help, you get yourself in a hole, you've got, you put a hole in the cava and you've got your hand on the cava and now you're a one-handed bandit. That's the person that I call.
Right. What do you think is your strongest trait in the OR? Besides the Southern drawl.
I think for our program, the strongest trait is training to independence. And, there's several ways we accomplish that. One is being patient with trainees. It's graded responsibility. It's letting the first time you do a case, you're there for essentially the entire case. And then as time progresses, we let our trainees do as much as they can on their own, but with help, and then we're there. So we have a first assistant who's been with us 15 years. We have a couple, but the lead is really excellent. And she's really excellent at, she does things two ways. One is she's a good first assistant, so if you're the trainee, you've got someone there to help you. But she gives the fellows, for example, confidence. And this goes both ways. So if they're getting into bleeding, they're doing a transplant, for example, things are starting to get a little hairy, she'll say, you better call Chapman, you better call Doyle. But she also will, at times, do the reverse, and that is, things are going okay, but it's just going to be one of those cases that there is going to be some bleeding that you just got to work through. And the fellow will say, oh gosh, do we need to call? Is it time to get Chapman down here? And she'll say, no, don't do that. You're doing fine. Keep going. And so over time, they get to the point that they are pretty independent for straightforward major cases. So first-time liver transplant, they can do on their own confidently when they're done. Straightforward major hepatectomy. Complex cases are a different matter, but complex cases are a different matter for all of us. I mean, I'll be the first to say, I want one of my colleagues in helping out.
Yeah. I know many of your former fellows, and some of them are in the room, and I've talked to a few of them, and I guess along those lines, I asked them, what is Will's strongest trait in the OR, and they said that he doesn't show up. So, you have a weakness? Anything you would do better in the OR?
I think having more patience sometimes.
Yeah.
You want things to go well, and you got to be more patient, and especially if the schedule's complicated. I think that's the thing that I'll work towards.
Tell me about a time when you shit your pants in the OR.
Well, unfortunately, those happen from time to time, and I think the common theme is when it's more often with complex liver transplant, but it can happen in hepatectomies also. And the biggest challenge is when you're getting into significant hemorrhage, especially on a redo transplant, for example, and you are just not sure you're going to get out of the case. You got to press on. That's the real worry, and that happens a couple times a year.
Yeah, we've all been there. Are you better in 2019 than you were in 2009?
I think in many ways, yes. So I think, we heard this yesterday with your judgment improves after you've had experience with poor judgment. And so, you learn, we all ought to learn from our mistakes, but I think you do learn from your mistakes. So I think, for me, I think my judgment's better in 2019. I don't know about my stamina. I think that's the thing that is probably less good. So a long day, multiple cases, the next day I feel it. And in 2009, I didn't feel it.
So do you think you've peaked yet?
I think it's about now. Maybe everybody always thinks it's about now, but I'm hopeful I'm not on the downslide.
Yeah. You can only do transplant or HPB. Which do you choose?
That would be a really difficult choice. And one of the unique things is that marriage of those two procedures. And that's what's so great about this organization, because they're colleagues that are involved in both. I'm not sure what I would pick. It may be HPV.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about mentoring when we wrap up. So when you work with a young surgeon, there's a lot of them in the room, what's the one thing that you need to spend the most time with them on? You hire a new faculty member over the years, fellows, things like that. What's the one thing that you really have to keep grinding on?
Yeah, good surgeons are aggressive. They want to do more cases. They want to build their practice. They want to build their referral base. And if they don't have the fire in the belly, it's a problem. On the other hand, that can get people in trouble. And it's really that the ability to have some self-awareness. It's the emotional intelligence to be able to be aggressive, but at the same time, not turn off other people. You know, we see it, some of our very best surgeons in the OR are not necessarily the very best out of the OR, on the floor, interacting with other people. And that's a little bit tricky. It's kind of hard to give feedback to someone. You know, you got to kind of rein them in a little bit from time to time, but you don't want to squelch their enthusiasm. But I think that's the hardest thing for young surgeons in their career to develop.
What's the best advice you can give to the young surgeons in the room? Just take it easy?
Well, it's have a plan, and then execute your plan. So if it's HPV and liver transplant, that's what we see, you know, in our world a lot. And it's the most competitive. It's the hardest to get to. It's really difficult. When somebody says, you know, I want to go do HPV and liver transplant, I'm like, great. Well, good luck finding that. You can find it, but it takes many years for most people. So have a plan, have focus, but be patient.
Any pet peeves about faculty members? Things you could change?
I don't know. I think the biggest one is individuals who either don't have or lost their humility. And it's anybody who's projecting that they have done things that you know are not really exactly right. Everybody knows that. Everybody picks that up.
Yeah.
And it's never, it's self-destructive for most people. Fortunately, we don't see it a lot, but we see it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think, any idea how many mentees that you have now? How many people you've
really
trained?
Close, I would say, I would guess maybe 20.
From fellowship?
Mostly fellowship, but some from house staff.
Yeah.
You know, I spent a lot of time with Dave Kuby. I'd consider Kuby a mentee,
Yeah.
although Kuby was never a fellow with us.
Right.
One of your failures.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you very much, Will, and hopefully everyone learned a little something about him.
Thank you.
Thank you.